right after his weak comments yesterday that failed to refute any moral equivalence between the International Criminal Court's decision to seek to arrest the Israeli Prime Minister on one side, alongside, of course, the Hamas terror leadership on the other side. Our Prime Minister today hid from the media. But not hiding was Peta Credlin, who said withdrawing from the court should be something Australia ought to consider. As did the man who supported Australia joining up in the first place, former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer.
This is an outrageous decision. I think if the 4 or 5 judges decide to proceed with the prosecutor's recommendation, it will be the death of the International Criminal Court, and countries like Australia should just withdraw from it altogether.
And look, I have to say, as I've written for the Australian newspaper tomorrow, this issue is the final straw for me. Anthony Albanese is simply not up to being a national leader if he cannot take a position on a moral issue as fundamental as this. For his comment, I'm joined now by Foreign Editor for the Australian, Sheridan. Well, we saw strength from Joe Biden. I don't normally use Joe Biden and the adjective strength in the one sentence, but he was very, very strong yesterday. There was statements from the Brits, the Germans, the Italians, the Austrians, Czechs, a whole lot, Greg. They all condemned the court's move. And our Prime Minister, though, wants to sit on the fence. As I said in my column tomorrow, this is the Emperor's got no clothes for me. It's that moment for me from here on in, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, Peter, great to be with you. If you can indulge me, I'll just take 1 second to pay a tribute to Nova Peris. There's no upside in this for her, but she's come out with decency, with common sense, with logic. I mean, there's leadership in the Labor Party from Nova Peris, but not from any of the current folks in Parliament. And one thing she said today, why can't we have protests on the street saying free the hostages and end the war? And, you know, that's an unanswerable question. Look, I think this is Albanese's worst moment as a Prime Minister. I got to tell you, I really like Albo as a person, you know, fellow Christian Brothers old boy, rugby league fanatic. I mean, he's got a lot of money in the bank with me, but I think this is, you know, just pathetic, just pathetic. The idea that you can't make a comment on an International Criminal Court case is absurd. We've often done it in the past. All of our allied governments are doing it. It's utterly pathetic to say you can't. Now, he ought to have the courage of his convictions. If he believes outrageously that a fellow ally, a fellow democracy, should be charged before the International Criminal Court for the crime of defending itself, and a country which has excellent independent legal procedures which will investigate any potential, you know, missteps or bad actions by any of its own players. So the International Criminal Court shouldn't be anywhere near it, and it has no jurisdiction anyway. There's no member state. Now, if he believes in the face of all that these warrants against the Israeli Prime Minister should be issued, well, he ought to have the guts to say so, and then we'll digest that horrible, bitter new element in our politics. And if he believes, like Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak and Justin Trudeau and all of our traditional allies and all of our own traditional positions, that this is at least a grotesque overreach by the International Criminal Court and possibly something much more sinister, then he ought to have the guts to say that. And for once in his life, stand up to the Greens and the Islamists who are making his life miserable as leader of the Labor Party. But the one thing he should not do is hide in a coward's castle behind a completely fraudulent and manufactured convention that you're not allowed to comment on the International Criminal Court, which frankly is such a silly proposition. I'm astonished that he's just not too embarrassed to put it out there in public.
Well, we have plenty of comments about Julian Assange. We speak out against World Trade Organisation cases. We talk about cases in international forum about the environment. We're always out there litigating international law and international institutions. You make a point in your column today that this says a lot about the toxic, obsessive, anti-Israel culture of the UN. You look at that UNGA vote, the UN General Assembly vote last week. This is basically upending, Greg, the settled international law that gives a nation state the right to self-defence. That's the takeout for me, that this is upending international law.
Yeah, you're right, Peter. So I opposed our signing the Rome Statute when we did because I could see that it was going to be captured by the international UN bureaucracy and used only against nations like us. They come for Israel today, they'll come for us tomorrow on some trumped-up, nonsensical charge. And, you know, Downer, I really admire Alexander Downer, but I mean, he's right to be ashamed of the fact that he championed signing this thing. Now, in the past, we have been able to reform really egregious and terrible excesses of the United Nations system. Now, this court is not technically part of the UN system, but it is in effect. It's governed by agreements with the UN and so on. We can't do it on our own. You know, if a government decided to walk away from the ICC, they certainly would get support from me. But I'm not suggesting we do it on our own, but with like-minded nations. Now, the judges may refuse these warrants if there is sufficient political opposition. So here is another reason that Albanese's cowardice is so egregious, because the Americans have said they might subject ICC personnel who do this to sanctions. And if the judges in the ICC have one whit of common sense, they will deny these warrants and the ICC will survive. But if you're going to get a campaign to reform the ICC, or indeed to abolish it, which I think would be perfectly sensible, you're going to need a whole swag of like-minded countries to answer together. It would have to be under the leadership of the United States. I'm generally not an admirer of Joe Biden's presidency, but on this, you know, he's as good as Ronald Reagan. I couldn't fault Biden for this.
I
and
agree.
Dutton,
I agree.
You know, who's done very well, was right to support him.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Greg. Thank you very much.